Actors, we've all got issues, so let's talk about them. I'm your host, Juan Ayala, and this is Actors with Issues. Hello, ladies, gents, and non-binary friends. Welcome to another bite-sized interview here on Actors with Issues, where we talk shop with guests from TV, film, and Broadway. I'm your host, Juan Ayala, and joining us today is the visual effects supervisor for Monarch, Legacy of Monsters, a new action-packed drama series set in the Monsterverse, premiering on November 17th on Apple TV+. Please welcome Sean Konrad. Sean, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
First off, I have to ask, what is your favorite monster movie?
Uh, Easy, Bong Joon-ho's The Host,
Yeah,
or Shin,
amazing choice.
or Shin Godzilla, or Godzilla, the original one. Probably all three on the same level.
So from what I was able to sort of research on you, some of your first jobs were as a digital compositor on a number of features in the early 2000s. So what was that path like going from digital compositor to today as a VFX supervisor?
I have a friend who uh, has this philosophy that, sometimes visual effects supervisors are, when they come from comp, um, they're really suited for it because they understand how all the pieces fit together. Like literally what your job is you're taking all the different pieces and making them fit together.
Mm.
And sometimes in like the pipeline, you will become the person who chases things a little bit. You almost become like a coordinator for the shot.
Mm.
And that is like you go to, like, you're not sure what's going on with something, you're waiting on it, and you go talk to the animator and you learn what they're doing, and then you find out what it's going to be. And so for me, like, that transition was not easy, but like at least I sort of had that background of like chasing things down. And I also have like a technology background, so I understand things like simulation. And the trickiest stuff is always like really really subjective, talent driven tasks, like animation is like a real craft that you should study for years and years and years before you try to direct it. And as a visual effects supervisor, you might get like a few months of training on it and then have to be dumped in. And so you really rely on the talent of the people around you to drive that.
And you've been part of this franchise pretty much since the first entry, from what I saw. And I'm sure back then, maybe it was, maybe it wasn't sort of conceived that they would be merging these different IP together of these classic monsters. So what has it been like, that journey, seeing it from 2014's Godzilla to now, almost a decade later?
It's super interesting. Like I was an artist on Godzilla 2014 and supervised a sequence on King of the Monsters. And so like, a lot of that was very opaque to me in the background. But that first movie was really tricky because we didn't know what it was going to be. We didn't know how Godzilla moved. Like the MonsterVerse has really tried to have a grounding to its action. And sometimes it still gets over the top and fun and bombastic and crazy, but we still, like, in that initial movie, it was a very somber movie and deliberate, and the way that Godzilla moves kind of reflects that. Like, he's not slow, but there's a lot of momentum and a lot of follow through. It's like an elephant can move really fast, but it needs to get up to speed, and then when it stops, it takes a bit. So it's, like, how do you translate that into the world? And then, as we've seen the films develop, like, we used to have Godzilla like clouded and atmospherics at night, and now, more and more, as the technology changes and we can render things more realistically, full daylight becomes like an option for a lot of these scenes. And so we've embraced both sides of it, right? Like,
Mm.
a lot of the way that you photographed Godzilla 2014 from the subjective human point of view is something that we really took to heart in the show, but we wanted to show Godzilla in full daylight and have all of his warts be shown.
And so, having more of a front-facing position myself, I don't know too much about sort of the hierarchy in the VFX department. So, who do you and your department collaborate with the most? Is it the director, the showrunner, the designer? Is it sort of a panel of all of those people? What's that whole process like?
It's a panel of all those people, especially while you're shooting. Like a lot of my, most thorough conversations are with the directors and the writers about
Mm.
what we're going to do and how we're going to achieve it. Like, early on in the process, a director will storyboard a scene and then give it to us, and then we'll go through it, talk about challenges, and then we'll pre-visit. And once we pre-visit, we'll break it down and say, okay, we're going to need a blue screen here. We're going to need to put a, a tennis ball in a painter's bowl so the actors know where to look in this shot. And, we'll break all those things down. And then while we're designing the environments, we're working with the art department. We're trying to figure out, what they're going to build versus what we're going to take over, because it's not functional to build like an entire plutonium plant interior, and then, we're working with stunts to make sure that they have the right, rigging to create the contact points that we need. And we're working with the SFX team to make sure the dust that they're raining down is not something we'll have to replace. And, so we're working with everybody at the various stages. And then, the director is definitely the biggest, the most important role that we're dealing with in the shoot. And then once we get to post, it's the showrunner, it's Chris Black, it's the editors, it's the producers, it's the executives at Apple and Legendary and Toho that we're, sort of funneling everything through.
Mm-hmm. And you sort of mentioned that sort of evolution of the tech that is used a lot for effects in film and television, all of that. So what would you say is maybe one of the most exciting new developments or software tools that you've been able to use or maybe see evolve over the years?
Yeah, I only barely got to use it on the show, and it was just like it's just because of the nature of like the timelines we're working with. But there's like new technology where you can take like an iPad Pro, and there's a LiDAR scanner on it, so you can like scan the set that you're standing in, and then you can walk around and you'll have a real world measurement of what that set is looking like, and then you can go boop, put your monster right there. And that, becomes a tool where you can like walk over to the director and show, okay, you've got your camera here, meaning we're going to see that part of the leg unless we push it back like 100 feet. Are you cool with that? And then they're like, okay, no, let's widen out the lens. Let's, so it helps make some creative decisions on the day that you wouldn't used to not be able to do. On the other hand, like, that tool becomes like, is it absolutely necessary all the time? Like we've been faking it for so long that, and like sometimes, does that stuff actually make it any better? It's sort of hard for me to tell. We didn't use any like LED volumes on the show. We talked about it early on, but we just didn't, the set builds we were doing just sort of came together quite late. So it wasn't going to be possible for us to do a digital extension, but stuff like that is stuff I'd love to work with in the future.
To me, sort of seeing different projects that I've filmed in an environment like the volume is like just the coolest thing. It's like the game engine rendering and all of that is just so cool to see. Is that something that you think would have been helpful during this series, or do you think that the way you guys did it was ultimately the best way?
I think like there's parts where it definitely could have helped a lot. There's like an economy of scale with LED volume stuff where if you're shooting like 10 minutes in an environment that of screen time, you have to do it because it's just like, the shot cost becomes too much. And then also the lighting can look a little bit more realistic at times. But I know so many people who have these horror stories of like having to replace everything in an LED volume where they're like rotoing every single hair off of a person's head.
Oh, yeah.
And so like when you really start thinking about that equation of like, do you have the time and money to do it twice? And it doesn't, unless you're 100% sure of what you're doing, it won't work. And, with the schedules that we were doing, you can only shoot with one camera on an LED volume, or if you're shooting two cameras, you need to be shooting in completely opposite coverages, which you don't block a scene with completely opposite coverage. So there's a lot of like intuitive things about filmmaking that an LED volume is like really difficult to do if you're on, an episodic schedule. Obviously some shows do it and do it well, but still, even those shows have like huge amounts that they're replacing. So places I definitely would love to have used it. And then a lot of other places where, if we had used it, I would be probably still working on this right now, trying to fix it.
Awesome. Well, Sean, thank you so much for joining us today. And it was such a pleasure chatting with you. And for anyone listening or watching, be sure to check out Monarch Legacy of Monsters, premiering its first 2 episodes on November 17th on Apple TV+. Thanks for joining us. Be sure to subscribe to Actors with Issues on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts, and visit our YouTube channel for full video interviews. Actors with Issues is executive produced and hosted by Juan Ayala. See you next time.